Whitney Davis had spent 3 years blending into the background at the Azure Pearl, Manhattan's most exclusive dining establishment. The 28-year-old black server understood which tables to avoid, and Richard Thornton's white billionaire table was at the top of that list. Then his son began to dance. 8-year-old Daniel, who was autistic, suddenly became animated when the jazz pianist started playing. Without a moment's notice, the boy darted from his father's table and started swaying to the music. His hands flapped enthusiastically, and his body spun in circles. He jumped and moved with uninhibited happiness. He ran to Whitney, took her hands, and pulled her into his dance. Whitney paused for just a second. Then, something in Daniel's pure joy broke through her reserve. She started moving with him, gentle turns, soft swaying, mirroring his unique rhythm. The boy's face lit up with an exceptionally bright smile. 15 seconds of genuine connection. 15 seconds of a child finally being met on his own terms. Then Richard Thornton's voice erupted. Quote, 200 guests stared at the black woman dancing with the white billionaire's disabled child. People like you should know your place. Have you ever been judged for simply showing kindness? The Azure Pearl was more than just a restaurant. It was a temple of affluence located on the 42nd floor of a Manhattan skyscraper, where the elite paid $500 per plate to be seen doing charity work. Tonight's gala, ostensibly for children with disabilities, had attracted 200 of New York's wealthiest benefactors, individuals who wrote checks with more zeros than most Americans would ever see in their lifetime. Whitney Davis had learned to navigate this world by becoming inconspicuous. At 28, she had perfected the art of anticipating needs before they were spoken, of keeping her dark eyes downcast, of moving through rooms without creating a stir. Her slender figure in a crisp uniform, her hair pulled back into a severe bun, and her neutral expression were all meticulously crafted to avoid drawing attention. She had worked there for 3 years, long enough to understand the hierarchy of tables. Table 1 was always reserved for Richard Thornton. Richard Thornton, 55, embodied a type of wealth that felt predestined. Silver hair, impeccably styled, a custom Italian suit costing more than Whitney's annual salary, and the effortless confidence of someone who had never been told no in his entire life. He had amassed his billions in real estate, constructing luxury developments that displaced working-class families, which he termed urban renewal. His charitable foundation had donated $2 million to special needs programs, a tax write-off that came with excellent public relations. "What is she doing?" someone in the crowd whispered. Dr. Bennett replied quietly but distinctly. "She's offering him co-regulation. His nervous system is in fight or flight. She's showing him a pathway back to calm." Whitney started speaking, her voice soft and steady beneath the screaming. "Daniel, the music is still here. Remember how we danced? Remember how good that felt?" The screaming fractured slightly, not ceasing, but changing. "The music doesn't stop just because things got scary," Whitney continued. "It's still playing. Can you hear it?" She began tapping a rhythm on her own knees, the same rhythm Daniel had moved to when they danced. Tap, tap, pause, tap, tap, pause. Daniel's hitting slowed, his screams reduced to ragged sobs. Whitney kept tapping. Quote, 5. She started incorporating small movements, a gentle sway, a soft hand gesture, echoes of their brief dance together, and then miraculously, Daniel's right hand twitched once, twice, attempting to copy her rhythm. "That's it," Whitney whispered. "You're remembering. You're in control. You decide when to move. You decide the rhythm." She slowed her movements even further, making each gesture deliberate and clear. Daniel's hand began to tap against his own leg. Tap, tap, pause. Tap, tap, pause. His rigid body began to soften. His breathing, which had been shallow and panicked, started to deepen. His eyes, wild and unfocused moments ago, began tracking Whitney's movements. The restaurant had fallen silent, save for Whitney's humming and Daniel's gradually quieting sobs. Quote, Whitney said gently. Quote, 1, 5 seconds, 10, 20. Then Daniel's eyes found hers. Brief contact, then away, then back. Recognition. "Hi, Daniel," Whitney said softly. "I see you. I'm still here." The boy's tapping continued. Tap, tap, pause, tap, tap, pause. Whitney slowly began to sway again, echoing their dance from before, but smaller now, gentler, non-threatening. Quote 4. Daniel hesitated. His body was still trembling from the aftermath of the meltdown, but his screaming had stopped. His self-injury had stopped. Slowly, carefully, Daniel began to sway just a little, matching Whitney's rhythm. Whitney's eyes filled with tears, but she blinked them back. Quote 5. She began to stand, moving very slowly, and extended her hand, not grabbing, not demanding, just offering. Daniel's eyes drifted to her hand, then ascended to her face. Following a deliberate pause, he extended his own hand and clasped hers. They swayed in unison, both emitting a soft hum, their movements synchronized to an unspoken rhythm. This wasn't the spontaneous, joyous dance from moments before. Instead, it was a quieter, more delicate interplay, a dance signaling restoration. A collective sigh escaped the room's occupants. Several guests discreetly dabbed at their eyes. Dr. Bennett advanced, her professional demeanor wavering slightly. Mr. Thornton, did you witness that? Your son was embroiled in a severe crisis, self-harming and completely dysregulated. Miss Davis successfully de-escalated him in under 5 minutes using advanced therapeutic strategies. She then addressed Whitney directly. Where did you receive your training? This was the pivotal moment, the turning point. Whitney's gaze remained fixed on Daniel, her body still swaying with his. Quote, Immediately, a low murmur spread through the room. Emma Wilson stepped forward, her voice resonating with clarity and pride. Quote 3. The murmuring intensified. Richard Thornton remained motionless, observing his son, who was now composed, connected, and safe in the embrace of the woman he had just attempted to terminate. Quote 4. Richard's voice was barely a whisper. You've been serving my table for 3 years, and you're a trained therapist. Whitney finally met his gaze. I was a therapist. I became a server because it was necessary for survival, and you never perceived me as anything more than that. Daniel tightened his grip on her hand and leaned against her side. The restaurant erupted in applause. Dr. Sarah Bennett moved closer to Whitney and Daniel, her expert eyes absorbing every detail. What you just demonstrated is known as trauma-informed crisis intervention combined with somatic regulation. I've been a clinical psychologist for 23 years, and I've witnessed board-certified therapists fail at precisely what you've just achieved. She addressed the gathered guests, her voice imbued with professional authority. That wasn't mere luck or innate talent. That was training, expertise, and a genuine comprehension of neurodevelopmental disorders. Richard Thornton's face had lost all color. He looked at his son, now calm, holding Whitney's hand, humming softly, then back at Whitney. I don't understand. Why didn't you tell me all those times you served our table? Would you have listened? Whitney inquired softly. Or would you have simply seen another server aspiring beyond her station? The question landed with the impact of a stone dropped into still water, sending ripples of discomfort through the crowd. Emma retrieved her phone. With your permission, Whitney, I'd like to read something. She navigated to a saved screenshot. This is Whitney's academic transcript from the Columbia Dance Movement Therapy Program, GPA 4.0. Research focus, rhythmic synchronization in autism spectrum disorders. Faculty recommendation. Miss Davis demonstrates extraordinary capacity to connect with nonverbal children. Her intuitive understanding combined with theoretical rigor makes her one of the most promising therapists we've trained. Emma then looked at Richard. She didn't fail. She sacrificed her future to save her mother's life. That's called love, Mr. Thornton, not failure. Richard's hands were trembling. 3 years. I've spent 3 years and hundreds of thousands of dollars searching for someone who could help Daniel. 6 different therapists. None of them could reach him like this. And you were right there. I was invisible, Whitney corrected. I served your wine. I cleared your plates. I existed merely as a function, not as a person. Doctor. Bennett cleared her throat. Mr. Thornton, I typically do not offer unsolicited professional recommendations, but I am making an exception now. Your son just experienced a severe meltdown in a triggering environment and recovered in under 5 minutes. That is clinically extraordinary. Most children require 30 minutes to several hours to recover from that level of dysregulation. She gestured toward Daniel, who was now seated calmly at Whitney's feet, still holding her hand. Quote, 1. Richard ran a hand through his silver hair. For the first time, Whitney observed an emotion other than arrogance in his expression. She saw fear, desperation, the face of a father who recognized his failure toward his son. Quote 2. He asked. Quote, so. Dr. Bennett stated bluntly. Quote 4. A heavy silence permeated the air. Every guest watched, waiting. Finally, Richard spoke. Quote 5. He pulled out his phone, his fingers rapidly moving across the screen. Quote 6. Whitney's breath hitched. $100,000 would eradicate her mother's medical debt, finance Jasmine's college education, transform everything. But Richard wasn't finished. His voice acquired a sharper edge. Quote, the ruthlessness of these terms was staggering. This wasn't about Daniel. This was about Richard safeguarding his ego, constructing a scenario where he couldn't lose. Emma stepped forward. Quote 1. Quote 2. Whitney interrupted. Emma turned to her, her eyes wide with alarm. Quote 3. Quote, Bull 4. Whitney reiterated, looking directly at Richard. Quote 5. She gently squeezed Daniel's hand. I will work with your son. I will help him discover his voice. And perhaps, if you are capable of growth, I will help you understand the boy you've been neglecting. The restaurant erupted in whispers. Phones emerged, people recording, texting, posting. Dr. Bennett stepped forward. I will volunteer as clinical supervisor. Monthly evaluations, documented progress, official assessments. This will be legitimate therapeutic intervention, Mr. Thornton, not some performance for your ego. Richard nodded stiffly. Fine, 30 days starting tomorrow morning. He glanced at Daniel, who was leaning contentedly against Whitney's leg, humming the jazz melody. Something in Richard's expression fractured, vulnerability piercing through his armor. Quote, he said quietly. And for once, he didn't sound like a billionaire issuing commands. He sounded like a frightened father. Please, he's been through enough. Whitney met his eyes. The person who has been hurting him is you, Mr. Thornton. I will help Daniel, but you need to stop damaging what I am endeavoring to heal. The words were delivered calmly, devoid of malice, yet they struck with the force of a physical blow. Richard flinched but remained silent. He turned and walked toward the exit, leaving his son with the black server he had attempted to destroy an hour earlier. As the crowd dispersed, Emma embraced Whitney tightly. You just agreed to the impossible. Whitney looked down at Daniel, who smiled up at her. No, she said. I just agreed to do what I was always meant to do. By the time Whitney returned home that night at 11:45 p.m., her phone was inundated with notifications. Someone at the gala had recorded the entire incident. Richard's initial outburst, the dance, Daniel's meltdown, Whitney's intervention, and the confrontation. It had been uploaded to Twitter at 9:17 p.m. with the caption, Wototska's quote 6. Within 3 hours, it had garnered 500,000 views. By morning, 3 million. By noon, the following day, 12 million. Whitney sat at her small kitchen table, her mother opposite her, both staring at the phone in disbelief. Quote 7. Her mother said, peeking through the curtain. Quote. Whitney's phone rang again. She had stopped answering after the 30th call, but this number seemed familiar. She picked up. Miss Davis, this is Dr. Patricia Romano from Columbia. Whitney's heart seized. Her former mentor, the woman whose disappointment had haunted her for 6 years. Dr. Romano, I watched the video. Her mentor's voice was thick with emotion. Quote. Whitney found herself speechless. Quote 3. The words felt surreal. Quote, Besself. Quote 5. After the call ended, Whitney sat in stunned silence. Her phone buzzed, a text from Emma. Quote, Sarix. Whitney grabbed the remote. On screen, the anchors were discussing the viral video. This narrative has captivated millions, the anchor announced. A black woman, working as a server, who secretly held an advanced degree in therapy, intervened to assist a billionaire's disabled son. Immediately after that, same billionaire had publicly humiliated her. The ensuing national dialogue regarding social class, race, and unacknowledged talent is truly remarkable. The segment featured interviews with other service professionals who shared their concealed qualifications. A janitor who held a civil engineering degree, a barista with a PhD in literature, a delivery driver who was formerly a concert violinist. The unfolding story was clearly expanding beyond Whitney. Another text appeared from an unknown number. "This is Rebecca Thornton, Daniel's mother. Thank you for truly seeing my son when his father couldn't. I will support your efforts with him in any way possible. Please do not give up on Daniel." Then Emma's message arrived again. Quote, 1. Whitney's mother clasped her hand, tears streaming down her face. "Your father would be so incredibly proud, darling, so proud." The hashtag John Justice for Whitney was trending. So were Itangbang invisible talent and dance therapy. However, Whitney was not contemplating the newfound recognition, the scholarship offers, or even the viral video. Her thoughts were solely on Daniel, on the assurance she had given, on the 30-day commitment to aid a child who desperately needed someone to genuinely perceive him. The entire world would be observing, but the only gazes that truly mattered were Daniel's. The demonstration took place at the Riverside Center for Special Needs, Whitney's former place of employment, within a spacious sunlit studio, featuring mirrors along one wall and observation windows for families and professionals. A crowd of 180 individuals filled the viewing area. Parents, therapists, reporters, and Richard Thornton, seated in the front row alongside his ex-wife, Rebecca. Richard had insisted on a public demonstration. He desired concrete proof, clinical validation, and, Whitney suspected, a final chance to witness her failure. Dr. Sarah Bennett addressed the assembly, clinical assessment forms in hand. "Over the past 30 days, I have conducted weekly evaluations of Daniel Thornton's progress under Ms. Davis's therapeutic care. Today's demonstration will illustrate the outcomes of that intensive intervention." Whitney entered with Daniel. The 8-year-old still generally avoided direct eye contact with most people, but his hand rested comfortably in hers. He wore casual attire, and his posture appeared relaxed and approachable. When Daniel commenced therapy with Miss Davis, Dr. Bennett elucidated, he was largely nonverbal in stressful environments, prone to severe meltdowns averaging 45 minutes in length, and experienced significant challenges with emotional regulation and social interaction. He had been through 6 therapists in 2 years, with minimal documented improvement. She paused for dramatic effect. "I am going to show you what 30 days of appropriate therapeutic intervention can achieve." Whitney guided Daniel to the center of the studio. The jazz piano commenced playing. "It Don't Mean a Thing," the song from that initial evening. Daniel's face instantly brightened. Without any prompting, he started to move. Yet, this was not the chaotic, uncontrolled movement observed 30 days prior. This was purposeful, expressive, elegant. Whitney moved in unison with him, and they danced together, a dialogue without words. She led, he followed, he improvised, she mirrored. It was a visible manifestation of connection. Quote 3. Dr. Bennett narrated, quote, "After 2 minutes of dancing, Whitney gently slowed their movements and addressed the audience, all while maintaining Daniel's engagement. We have been focusing on emotional identification through physical expression," she expounded. She then demonstrated several movements, arms tightly wrapped for scared, hands over the heart for happy, arms reaching upward for excited. "Daniel," she said softly, "can you demonstrate to everyone how you are feeling right now?" The room fell silent. Daniel ceased dancing. He stood motionless, and Whitney could sense the collective holding of breath from the audience. Then, deliberately, Daniel placed both hands over his heart. "Happy?" The crowd gasped softly, but Whitney was not finished. "Can you tell us in words, Daniel? Can you use your voice?" Daniel's mouth opened, then closed, then opened again. "I feel," his voice was small but clear, "I feel safe with Miss Whitney." The observation room erupted in soft applause, but Daniel was not yet done. He turned towards the window where his parents were seated. But Whitney had served him countless times. She had observed his treatment of staff. She had overheard his remarks about certain people and those neighborhoods. She had seen the disdain beneath the philanthropist's facade. Most painfully, she had witnessed how he treated his own son. Daniel Thornton sat beside his father, but inhabited an entirely different world. The 8-year-old had sandy blonde hair that fell into his eyes and wore a small suit that made him resemble a miniature adult. While other children at the gala ran and played, Daniel sat rigidly, hands gripping his chair, eyes fixed on the middle distance. He was autistic, mostly nonverbal, overwhelmed by the noise, the lights, and the dense crowd of people. Whitney had researched autism after her first encounter with Daniel 2 years prior. She had learned that every autistic person was unique, that Daniel's silence did not imply emptiness, that his lack of eye contact was due to sensory overload, not rudeness. She had noticed patterns, how he covered his ears when voices grew too loud, how he calmed when the restaurant's pianist played softer melodies, how music seemed to be the one thing that could reach him when nothing else could. But Richard appeared to view autism as a personal failing. Whitney had once overheard him tell a business associate, "Excellent, quote, 2," as if Daniel were a malfunctioning machine rather than a mind that worked differently. The divorce from Rebecca Thornton had occurred 2 years ago. Whitney didn't know the specifics, but she had heard whispers. Rebecca couldn't tolerate how Richard treated Daniel, how he kept the boy hidden at events, how he prioritized business over his son's therapy appointments. Now, Daniel lived between 2 homes, primarily raised by a rotating cast of nannies who quit after a few months because Richard's expectations were impossible. What Richard didn't know, what almost no one knew, was that Whitney understood children like Daniel in ways that went far beyond mere observation. 6 years ago, Whitney Davis had been a completely different person. She had been a graduate student at Columbia University, pursuing a master's degree in dance movement therapy, with a specialization in autism spectrum disorders. She had been passionate, talented, and at the top of her class. Her professors had called her gifted. "You possess a rare intuition," Dr. Patricia Romano had told her. "You comprehend how bodies communicate when words fail." Whitney had worked evenings at the Riverside Center for Special Needs, assisting nonverbal children in finding expression through movement. His eyes located his father. "Daddy." Daniel's voice was stronger now. Quote, 1. Richard's face crumpled. Tears streamed down his cheeks as he rose and walked towards the door leading into the studio. He entered slowly, uncertainly, and knelt before his son. "I would love to dance with you, buddy," Richard whispered. Daniel took his father's hands and began to sway, humming the jazz melody. Richard followed his son's lead, openly weeping. After 30 seconds, Daniel uttered the words that broke everyone in the room. "I'm not broken, Daddy. Miss Whitney taught me. I'm just different." Then Daniel wrapped his arms around his father's neck. Richard sobbed, embracing his son, finally truly seeing him. Dr. Bennett's voice was thick with emotion as she addressed the crowd. "What you have just witnessed is clinically significant progress across multiple domains: emotional regulation, verbal expression, social initiation, and perhaps most crucially, self-advocacy. This is not a miracle. This is what transpires when a child receives appropriate therapeutic intervention from someone who genuinely comprehends them." She turned to Richard, who was still holding Daniel. "Mr. Thornton, your son was never broken. He merely required someone who spoke his language." 2 hours following the demonstration, Richard requested a private meeting with Whitney. They sat in a small conference room at the Riverside Center, with Dr. Bennett present as mediator, while Daniel played contentedly with sensory toys in an adjacent room under Rebecca's supervision. Richard appeared diminished somehow, older, smaller. "I need to apologize to you," he began, his voice faltering. "Multiple apologies, in fact, for numerous cruelties." Whitney waited, saying nothing. "I called you filthy. I instructed you to know your place. I attempted to have you fired. I accused you of assault." He shook his head, unable to meet her gaze. "And you responded by saving my son. I didn't save him, or..." Etu, quote. 2. I helped him access what was already within him. Daniel was never the problem, Mr. Thornton. Quote, "Nah. I was the problem, yes." Quote, "So, why?" Quote, "Besef be spaved." After what I did to you, why did you help Daniel? Quote 6, because children do not deserve to suffer for their parents' failures, because I understand what it is like to be invisible, and because I recall how it feels when someone finally sees you. She leaned forward. May I ask you something candidly? When you looked at me that night at the Azure Pearl, what did you perceive? Richard's jaw clenched. I saw a black woman in a uniform, someone beneath me, someone whose sole value was serving me. You saw a function, not a person. Yes. And when you looked at Daniel, what did you perceive? Richard's hands trembled. I saw my failure. I saw something I could not control or fix or make acceptable to my peers. I saw, he stopped, his voice breaking. I saw my shame reflected back at me. And that, Whitney said quietly, is the true tragedy. You were so ashamed of Daniel's autism that you neglected to love him for who he is. You hired therapists not to assist Daniel, but to eradicate the aspects of him that embarrassed you. God. Richard buried his face in his hands. What kind of father does that? Dr. Bennett interjected. A father who has been conditioned by a society that prioritizes conformity over authenticity. But acknowledging harm is merely the initial step, Mr. Thornton. The question is, what will you do differently? Richard looked up, his eyes red and desperate. Tell me. Please tell me what to do. First, Whitney stated firmly, you apologize to Daniel. Truly apologize. Tell him he is not broken. Tell him his autism is not something to rectify. Tell him you were mistaken. I will, today. Second, you begin educating yourself about autism from autistic adults, not solely from professionals. Read their writings, listen to their experiences. Comprehend that Daniel's neurodevelopment is not a tragedy. It is simply a different mode of human existence. Richard pulled out his phone, taking notes. Third, Whitney continued, you address your own prejudice. What you did to me was not an isolated incident. You have treated service workers, people of color, anyone you deemed beneath you with disdain. That pattern must cease. It will, I promise. And fourth, most importantly, you spend genuine time with your son, not managing him, not fixing him, just being with him, learning who he is when you are not attempting to alter him. Richard looked through the window at Daniel, who was meticulously aligning colored blocks with focused concentration. I don't know how to just be with him. Then learn, Whitney said simply, the same way Daniel is learning to navigate a world that was not constructed for him, with patience, with humility, with the willingness to be uncomfortable and to make errors. Richard stood, walked to the window, and pressed his hand against the glass. Miss Davis, I do not merit your grace, but thank you for seeing my son, for not abandoning him when I had. Whitney joined him at the window. I did not do it for you. I did it for Daniel, and for every person who has ever been told they do not matter. They matter, Richard said quietly. You have taught me that. Finally. Good, Whitney said. Now go dance with your son. 6 months following, Whitney Davis stood within Columbia University's graduation hall, adorned in her cap and gown, finally prepared to accept the degree she had forgone 6 years prior. The auditorium was filled to overflowing. Her graduating class was present, along with journalists, therapists from across the nation, and numerous families whose children had been affected by her narrative and endeavors. In the inaugural row sat her mother, vibrant and well, alongside her sister, Jasmine, who was now flourishing at NYU. Emma Wilson was there, radiating pride, accompanied by staff from the Azure Pearl, who had pooled funds to purchase flowers. And, in the third row, appearing somewhat misplaced yet genuinely engaged, sat Richard Thornton next to his former wife Rebecca, with Daniel positioned between them. Dean Patricia Romano approached the lectern. Quote, The assembly rose as Whitney traversed the stage, at last receiving her master's degree in dance movement therapy with the utmost distinction. However, Dean Romano had an additional announcement. Miss Davis, your intervention with Daniel Thornton ignited a nationwide dialogue pertaining to concealed talent, systemic impediments, and the cost of survival for working-class students of color. In recognition of your profound influence, we are honored to declare the establishment of the Whitney Davis Opportunity Fellowship. Whitney's hand flew to her mouth. Mr. Richard Thornton has endowed this fellowship with $5 million. It will furnish full scholarships, living expenses, child care assistance, and emergency family support to students from low-income backgrounds pursuing degrees in therapeutic and social service fields. No student should ever again be compelled to choose between education and survival. The standing ovation persisted for 3 minutes. Richard approached the microphone, visibly apprehensive. "I am not accustomed to admitting when I am mistaken, but 6 months ago I was catastrophically incorrect. I publicly humiliated a woman because she extended kindness to my son. I perceived her skin color and her attire before I recognized her humanity, her expertise, her worth." His voice trembled. "Whitney Davis restored my relationship with my son. But beyond that, she compelled me to confront my own bigotry, my own cruelty, my own profound failure as both a father and a human being. This fellowship is not about redemption. I am uncertain if I merit that. It is about ensuring that talented, compassionate individuals like Whitney never have to relinquish their calling because society refuses to acknowledge their value." He turned towards Whitney. "Thank you for impressing upon me that truly seeing people, genuinely seeing them, forms the bedrock of all goodness in this world." The applause was deafening. Following the ceremony, Daniel rushed to Whitney and embraced her tightly. "Ms. Whitney, I remained still the entire time and only stuttered twice." "You were perfect," Whitney stated, kneeling down. "I am so proud of you. Dad is taking me to a jazz concert next week, a genuine one with live music." Daniel's words now flowed effortlessly, his progress remarkable. Quote 5. Quote 6. Richard approached Rebecca, who stood beside him. They now appeared as partners, not adversaries, united in their devotion to Daniel. Quote 7. Rebecca remarked softly. Quote 8. Quote 9. Richard added. Quote 10. Whitney observed him intently. The transformation was not yet complete, but it was authentic. Quote was hawalusens. Always quote, stel, at 12. Richard conceded, now quote, 13. A text message arrived on Whitney's phone. Dr. Bennett, official job offer, Director of Dance Movement Therapy, Riverside Center, $120,000 annually. Your program, your vision, say yes. Whitney gazed at the message. Director, the position she had envisioned since the age of 22. Her mother appeared at her side. What is it, darling? Whitney showed her, and her mother's eyes welled with tears. Quote 16. Quote 17. That evening, Whitney sat in her new apartment, the one with ample space and abundant light and a vista of actual trees, and opened her laptop. She typed to Dr. Bennett, or quote 18. Then she retrieved a fresh journal and began writing, quote 19. She desired to chronicle this odyssey from invisibility to visibility, from being silenced to being heard, from being dismissed to being valued. She wished for other individuals with dormant aspirations to understand that it was not too late. The final entry she penned that night was a dedication. For Daniel, who taught me that embracing one's uniqueness is beautiful. For my mother, who demonstrated that love demands sacrifice. For Emma, who had faith in me when I had ceased to believe in myself. For Dr. Romano, who never relinquished her commitment to her student. And for every server, janitor, cashier, driver, every individual rendered invisible by circumstance. This serves as proof that you matter. Your talent matters. Your dreams matter. You matter. Do not permit anyone to persuade you otherwise. 6 months prior, Whitney Davis had been imperceptible, serving champagne to individuals who never acknowledged her presence. Today she was recognized, celebrated, empowered. Tomorrow, she would unlock avenues of opportunity for others. For healing transcends mere individuals. It encompasses systems. It involves seeing people. It entails constructing a world where talent is not squandered due to poverty, where dreams do not perish due to medical expenses, where a person's worth is not dictated by their uniform or their complexion. One individual at a time, one dance at a time, one moment of genuine connection at a time. That is the mechanism of change. If this narrative resonated with you, do not merely observe, take action. Endorse this video if you believe talent is devoid of color or class. Share it with someone who needs to be reminded that their dreams still hold significance. Subscribe for additional accounts of unsung heroes who transform the world. And provide your comments below. Have you ever been compelled to sacrifice your dreams for your family? Have you ever experienced invisibility? Your story is important. She had developed techniques that combine rhythmic synchronization with improvisational dance, utilizing music to build connections where language could not reach. She had witnessed breakthrough after breakthrough. Children who had never made eye contact suddenly engaging. Kids who had been self-harming, learning to redirect that energy into expressive movement. She had been 6 months from graduation, already receiving job offers from prestigious therapy centers when her mother collapsed. A massive and sudden heart attack. The medical bills were catastrophic, $150,000 after insurance. Her father had passed away when Whitney was 16, leaving just her younger sister Jasmine, then 15, and her mother. Someone had to work. Someone had to keep the lights on, pay the bills, keep their mother alive. Whitney had made the choice in one devastating night. She had withdrawn from Columbia, packed her textbooks, and found the first job that offered immediate pay and health insurance. The Azure Pearl needed servers. She needed money. The arrangement was intended to be temporary. 6 years later, she was still there. She had kept one relic from her old life, a worn textbook on therapeutic movement interventions, hidden in her staff locker. Sometimes during breaks, she would flip through it, reading about techniques she had once mastered, remembering the person she used to be. Emma Wilson, the restaurant's 38-year-old manager, was the only person who knew Whitney's story. Emma had discovered Whitney crying in the staff bathroom during her first year and had somehow coaxed the truth out of her. Emma had become an ally thereafter, defending Whitney against difficult customers, assigning her the best shifts, and keeping her secret. Because in places like the Azure Pearl, possessing a graduate degree in therapy would make Whitney seem threatening, overqualified, and dangerous to the comfortable hierarchy that dictated servers should be simple, uncomplicated, and easily replaceable. So, Whitney remained invisible. She served champagne to people who never truly saw her. She cleared plates while conversations about stocks and summer homes unfolded. She existed in the periphery of other people's lives until tonight. Until the jazz pianist began playing an upbeat melody, Duke Ellington's "It Don't Mean a Thing." Until Daniel's body, which had been rigid with tension all evening, suddenly responded to the music. Until the boy stood up, his hands beginning to flap, his body beginning to move, a rare smile appearing on his face. Until he started dancing, and until Whitney made a choice that would change everything. The silence after Richard's outburst felt as though all the air had been sucked from the room. Whitney stumbled backward, releasing Daniel's hands. The boy immediately stopped dancing, his smile vanishing, confusion washing over his face. "I'm so sorry, Mr. Thornton," Whitney managed, her voice trembling. "He wanted to dance. I didn't mean to—" "I don't care what he wanted," Richard cut her off, his voice icy. "You don't touch my son, ever." He grabbed Daniel's wrist and pulled the boy back toward their table. Daniel made a small sound of distress, and Whitney's heart ached. Emma Wilson appeared at Whitney's side within seconds. Quote, quote. Richard's laugh was sharp and bitter. "She was making a spectacle of my son, dancing with him in front of everyone like he's some kind of—" He stopped himself, but the unspoken words hung heavily in the air. "Like he's some kind of circus act." Richard pulled out his phone. "Get me the owner now. I want this woman fired immediately." Fired. The word hit Whitney like a physical blow. Without this job, she couldn't pay her mother's medical bills, couldn't contribute to Jasmine's college tuition, couldn't keep their small apartment. "Mr. Thornton, please," Emma tried again. "Whitney is one of our best servers. This is a misunderstanding." "This is assault," Richard snapped. "She put her hands on my disabled son without permission. That's grounds for termination and possibly legal action." Assault. Whitney felt the blood drain from her face. That word could ruin her entire future. Emma's jaw tightened with barely controlled anger, but she was calculating too. Richard Thornton was a major investor in the restaurant. Crossing him could cost Emma her own job. Whitney gently touched Emma's arm. "It's okay, I'll go." But before anyone could move, Daniel started making sounds. Low, distressed whimpers that grew louder with each second. His hands began flapping frantically, not with joy this time, but with agitation. "Daniel, stop!" Richard said, his voice harsh. "We don't do this here." But Daniel couldn't stop. The whimpering escalated into rocking. The rocking turned into full-body tension. His breathing became rapid and shallow. Richard grabbed his son's shoulders. "I said stop it! Control yourself!" Whitney recognized what was unfolding. Daniel was nearing a meltdown, and Richard's sharp retort was only hastening it. "Mr. Thornton," she uttered softly, you need to depart." Richard now snarled. Then Daniel commenced screaming. Not words, merely sounds, high-pitched, agonizing, desperate. His entire body stiffened, and he began striking his own head with his fists. The refined gala descended into disarray. Guests pushed back from their tables. Some individuals retrieved phones, others averted their gaze, either embarrassed or frightened, or both. Richard attempted to restrain Daniel's arms, but the boy thrashed more violently, his screams escalating to an unbearable pitch. "Someone dial 911, Richard bellowed, his composure finally shattering. "Do something!" Emma rushed toward Daniel but froze, clearly uncertain how to assist. The other servers stood immobilized. Whitney observed from the kitchen threshold, every fiber of her being urging her to intervene. She understood Daniel's needs. She knew the precise techniques that could pull him back from the precipice. She had performed this dozens of times previously, but she had been dismissed, labeled an assailant, told to leave. Daniel's screams became more desperate. He was harming himself, and no one knew how to stop it. Whitney glanced at Emma. Emma reciprocated the look, and something intangible passed between them, permission, or perhaps just desperate hope. Whitney re-entered the dining room. "I said, leave!" Richard yelled when he saw her. But Whitney was no longer heeding him. She was listening to Daniel. As Whitney advanced toward the screaming child, memories resurfaced with painful clarity. 6 years prior, the Riverside Center, a boy named Marcus. He had been 5 years old, nonverbal, prone to violent meltdowns that left him bruised and his parents devastated. The center had allocated him to Whitney as her inaugural significant case under Dr. Patricia Romano's supervision. "He needs someone who won't fear his intensity," Dr. Romano had stated. "Someone who can meet him in his chaos." Whitney recalled that initial session. Marcus had been in the corner, screaming and banging his head against the padded wall. Every instinct had told her to retreat, call for assistance, admit her unpreparedness. Instead, she had sat 10 feet away from him. She had not spoken, had not touched him. She had simply begun to move, rocking gently, creating a rhythm with her body, humming a simple melody. For 20 minutes, nothing changed. Then Marcus's screaming fractured slightly. His banging decelerated, and then so gradually, Whitney almost missed it. His body began to sway in time with her rhythm. By the conclusion of that first hour, Marcus had crawled over and placed his tiny hand on her knee. No eye contact, no words, but connection. Genuine, authentic connection. Over 8 months, Whitney had collaborated with Marcus twice weekly. She had witnessed him transform from a child trapped in his own distress to a boy who could regulate his emotions, communicate through movement, and eventually speak. The day Marcus had embraced his mother for the first time since his diagnosis, everyone in the therapy room had wept. After Marcus, there had been 11 other children, each unique, each imparting something new about patience, creativity, and the languages bodies speak when words are unavailable. Her graduate thesis had centered on something she termed ors, quote, sa, gas itsans iseikos, the way mirroring a child's movements could forge neural pathways for emotional regulation. She had presented her preliminary findings at a regional conference. Therapy centers from Boston to D.C. had extended job offers. Then came the phone call that shattered everything. "Miss Davis, this is Columbia Presbyterian. Your mother has been admitted. You need to come immediately. Cardiac arrest at her cleaning job. Emergency surgery. 3 days in ICU." Whitney had sat in the hospital waiting room, watching the bill escalate on the screen. $50,000, $80,000, $120,000. Their insurance covered barely a third. Her mother survived, but their financial life flatlined. The bills arrived in waves: hospital, follow-up care, medications costing $400 per month, physical therapy, home health aides, then Jasmine's school expenses because someone had to keep the 15-year-old on track. Then the rent increase they couldn't afford. Whitney had performed the calculations repeatedly, hoping for different outcomes. Her graduate stipend was $2,000 per month. Rent was $1,800. Her mother's medications alone were $500. The figures simply did not align. They would never align. She recalled the night she withdrew from Columbia. She had been seated on her dorm room floor, surrounded by textbooks on motor development and trauma therapy, crying so intensely she couldn't breathe. Dr. Romano had implored her to stay. "We'll secure emergency funding. We'll defer your loans. We'll make it work. Whitney, you're too talented to lose." But Whitney had learned something her privileged classmates would never comprehend. Talent does not settle emergency room bills. Passion does not keep the lights on. And dreams are a luxury for those with safety nets. "I have to leave," she had told her mentor, her voice hollow. "My family needs me now, not in 6 months. Now." Packing her belongings had felt like dying. Walking past the Riverside Center for the final time, observing the children through the windows, knowing she was abandoning them, that had felt like something worse than dying. Marcus had cried when she bid him farewell. He had clutched her hand and said, "Miss Whitney, don't go. Please stay." She had promised him she would return. A lie, but a kind one. The Azure Pearl had hired her 3 days later. Good pay, excellent tips, comprehensive health insurance that covered pre-existing conditions. Everything she required and nothing she desired. For 6 years she had suppressed that aspect of herself. She had told herself it was temporary. She had promised herself she would return to school someday, but someday had a way of never materializing until tonight. Until Daniel danced with her and then melted down. Until Whitney realized that some skills do not vanish. They simply await the moment you need them most. She knelt 3 feet from the screaming child and began to hum. Whitney positioned herself meticulously, close enough to be present, yet distant enough not to overwhelm. Daniel was in full crisis now, screaming and striking himself, his entire body seized by distress. "Get away from him!" Richard shouted again, but a new voice cut through the pandemonium. "Let her work." A woman stepped forward from the crowd. Dr. Sarah Bennett, in her mid-50s with gray-streaked hair and an air of unshakable authority. "I'm a licensed child psychologist, Mr. Thornton. What she is doing is called therapeutic intervention. Let her proceed." Richard parted his lips to argue, but Dr. Bennett's tone allowed no room for debate. Whitney began to hum a steady, gentle jazz melody, the same one that had prompted Daniel to dance earlier. Quote 4. She allowed the sound to permeate his screaming, not competing with it, simply offering an alternative. Daniel's body shifted slightly. Somewhere beneath the panic, he heard it. Whitney began to rock, gentle and rhythmic, matching the tempo of the music in her mind. Her hands moved in small, repetitive patterns, not reaching toward Daniel, just creating a visual rhythm in the space between them,